Well, it is a great honor to be here. I am with Appalachian Voices. We are a regional organization in Appalachia that works to try to tackle some of the biggest environmental problems we have facing our region, and a lot of those are tied to coal. We're fighting new coal-fired power plants, and we're also trying to stop mountaintop removal coal mining, which is what I'm here to talk to you all about today. And even if you don't have much of a connection to Appalachia, even if you maybe, honestly, if you had to admit it, don't care that much about Appalachia, there are a couple of reasons that I think this story is important. One is that what I'm going to tell you about today, our campaign that we've been running to insert this issue into the national energy debate, is a great example of what Marcos was talking about earlier, about the, how did he put it, the democratizing nature of technology. And grassroots organizations in Appalachia have used technology to put this issue on the map for the first time. It's also important because this is an often overlooked but very compelling piece of the larger national debate about energy and global warming. It's a lot more visceral to people than what they hear about CO2 levels in parts per million. It's immediate, it's here in our backyard, and it is a symbol of how we've gone down the wrong path with our energy policy in this country and why we need to make some different choices. So mountaintop removal is a form of coal mining where instead of taking the coal out of the mountain like you would think they would do with a coal miner with a lamp on his helmet going underground, they just take the mountains off of the coal. The coal is in the mountains like layers in a cake, and so what they do is they drill holes into the mountains, they blow them up, and they shovel everything that is not coal off to the side and bury the streams. And to date, between 1,000 and 2,000 miles of streams in Appalachia have been buried. Over 450 mountains have been flattened, and that's happening in 4 states, in West Virginia, in Kentucky, in Virginia, and in my home state, which is Tennessee. This is done by huge equipment that is designed to take the coal miner out of coal mining. In 1950, there were 150,000 coal miners in West Virginia. Today, there are less than 15,000, and they're producing a similar amount of coal. They have to wash the coal. For those who are here for the incredibly moving presentation by Colin Finlay in his slideshow, you saw some of the impacts of this sludge, which is this residue left behind after they process the coal, full of heavy metals and chemicals. It's stored in earthen dams throughout Appalachia, over 600 of these dams, some of which are bigger than the Hoover Dam. It's also injected into the ground, into old underground mines. And then the coal is shipped out and used to provide electricity. About 7 to 10% of our electricity, of our coal in this country comes from mountaintop removal, and so that's about, since we get half of our electricity in this country from coal, that's about 3.5 to 5% of our electricity that comes from blowing up some of the oldest mountains on Earth. This has huge impacts, as you can imagine, on the people and the environment in the region. As you can see here, you have poverty rates in Appalachia. In the counties, and the red areas are where there's mountaintop removal taking place. The darkest blue counties have poverty rates in the neighborhood of 25 to 48% poverty. And when you consider the fact that billions of dollars of wealth have been exported out of these counties, you would think that the streets would be paved with gold. But in fact, the storefronts are boarded up, and people are really struggling to get by, and not only are left with no jobs once the industry ships out, but are left with a very toxic legacy behind them. They've got horrible colored water coming out of their pipes because the sludge is getting into their wells from those impoundments and from the underground injection of sludge into old abandoned mines. Their foundations of their houses are cracked by blasting. They've got coal dust coming onto their houses every day, which is what gives people black lung. The stories go on and on. This is just one example. This is Ed Wiley. He is a grandfather and a former coal miner, and in this picture, he's walking from Charleston, West Virginia to Washington, D.C. all by himself to go meet with Senator Robert Byrd and to talk to him about this school, which, as you can see, is in southern West Virginia. It's located right next to a coal silo where they load the train cars with coal. It creates lots of coal dust, sends it onto the school and onto the playground, and the kids and the teachers in the school are, a lot of them, sick because of this. And at the bottom of this, I think you can see that little silo. It's a very small little white thing there at the bottom. That's the school. You can see it's also located right beneath one of these sludge dams. And this is just emblematic of what's going on throughout the coal fields. This is just one school that needs to be moved. It's still in the same place. 250 kids will go to school there this fall unless the school is moved. And those dams have been known to fail in the past. This is Martin County, Kentucky in the year 2000 when 30 million gallons of sludge went into the Big Sandy River in eastern Kentucky. The EPA called it the largest environmental disaster in the history of the Southeast. And very few people heard about it, I would say in large part because most of the people who were impacted were some of the poorest people in America. This is happening in the headwaters of the drinking water supply of people all across the eastern U.S. at a time when we're all starting to realize how precious our fresh water is. And it's also happening in one of the world's biodiversity hotspots. When the glaciers came down during the Ice Age, a lot of species retreated up into the Appalachian Mountains. It was a refuge for all sorts of plants and animals. And when the glaciers retreated, it was really this refuge of life that repopulated much of our continent. It's really the mother forest. And we still have freshwater biodiversity here in these mountains in Appalachia that's greater than you'll find almost anywhere on Earth. And these are the very same mountains that are being blown up for mountaintop removal. So obviously, ultimately, then you burn this coal, and where does it end up? In our atmosphere, contributing to climate change, which we've already just heard so much about. And as one of my colleagues says, ultimately, it doesn't matter if this coal gets burned in South Carolina or South Korea or South Africa. Once it ends up in our atmosphere, the effect on the climate is the same. So this is happening on a huge scale, and I know the first time I had the chance to get in a small airplane and fly over this and see it for myself, it changed my life forever. And I would love for anyone here to come down and to do that. I'd love to take you on that same trip and give that experience to you. But obviously, we can't do that for the vast majority of people in this country. So we started using Google Earth. And we used Google Earth to initially show people the locations of all the mountains that had been blown up. And then for each of those mountains, we created a page. And so on those pages, you can see pictures of the mountain, you can see videos, you can read testimonials of the people who live there to start to put a face on this issue and to really start to communicate the scale. This is ilovemountains.org is the website, and the National Memorial for the Mountains is the centerpiece. It's this Google Earth tour. When we first launched it, we got lots of attention, and it let us bring the story to a whole new audience. This was in 2005. And then early in 2006, we heard from Google that they were going to put our memorial into the actual Google Earth software. So you can see in the bottom left of the screen, there's a layers menu in Google Earth. If those of you have it, you can turn on roads or restaurants or whatever you want to see. There's a global awareness folder in there. And it includes layers, as you can see here, from the Holocaust Museum about Darfur, from the United Nations Environment Program, from the World Wildlife Fund, and then our little Appalachian mountaintop removal layer. And those organizations are all very big, and we are very small. And for us to be able to have our guided tour of mountaintop removal in Google Earth means we get to put our story in front of 250 million people all around the world who have Google Earth on their computers. Our next step then was to try to make the connection between mountaintop removal and people's personal use of energy. Because even though it's a terrible story and a great tragedy, still when we talked to people about it, it felt like something that was distant to them, that was happening somewhere else, that was too bad, but they weren't really sure what it had to do with them. And so the next tool we created was, you can see right here, we're on the front page of I Love Mountains, and on the left, you have a little place where you can type in your zip code. And so I have typed in the zip code of our hotel here at the W, the very sustainable W Hotel. And first what you see is a map, a Google map that shows us our connection to mountaintop removal, which I will go into more in a minute. You also see on the right the story of a community that we're connected to right now in this room. This is a community in Virginia where a few years ago a little 3-year-old boy was sleeping in his bed, and a rock from a big boulder from a mountaintop removal operation came loose, rolled down the mountain, crashed through the wall of this house, and killed this little 3-year-old boy in his bed while he was sleeping. And right here in this room right now, we're connected to that story. So let's take a closer look at our connection. First, we're going to fly over to the layer that we have in Google. that you can see here. The little flags mark some of the featured mountains where you can read about the communities, see pictures, listen to videos. We also have a mine site tour of one mountaintop removal mine. This is the Hobet mine in southern West Virginia. This is just one mountaintop removal mine. You can see all the stages of the process. And if we turn that one mine red, another thing that we've been able to do is to take that and overlay it on 30 different American cities, just to give you a sense of scale. It's as big as Manhattan, and it's also, as you can see here, as big of much of San Francisco. From there, then, let's take a look at our connection. We fly over here, and we will see the coal-fired power plant that is closest to us on the grid. There are a couple on the grid here, but this one is the closest. And on the either the Google Earth or the Google Maps layer, you can click on any mine, on any coal plant that you see, and you can find out who owns it and who operates it, what some of the emissions are. And from here, we're going to fly then over to where this power plant gets its coal. This is in Utah. This is not in Appalachia. This is near actually where the Crandall mine, where a lot of those miners were killed, you might have remembered last year. In an underground mine, but this mine is run by Arch Coal. And Arch Coal is one of the biggest culprits, probably second only to Massey Energy, in the great tragedy of mountaintop removal. So once we visited that mine, we can fly over to Appalachia and we can see some of the mines that Arch Coal operates in Appalachia, some of the mountaintop removal mines. So if you live in the West Coast, you probably have an indirect connection like this to mountaintop removal. But if you live in the East, just about everyone in the East Coast is getting some of their electricity from mountaintop removal. Another thing that we've been able to do, thanks to Google Earth, is to really put some of these areas into high resolution. The way that Google sort of prioritizes this is they only are able to keep some certain areas in high resolution. The whole, if you've gone to look at your house, maybe some of you can't see your house in high resolution. But Google has put some of these mountaintop removal areas in high resolution, like this valley fill here, so that people can really fly around for themselves and get a sense of these kinds of operations, how close they are to these communities, as you just saw. This is a reclaimed valley fill, and there's just for scale, here's a downtown San Francisco building you may recognize, just to give you a sense of how big that one reclaimed valley fill is. These are right above all these communities, thousands and thousands of people. And here's another San Francisco landmark for you, the Golden Gate Bridge, on top of one of these mountaintop removal operations. Again, just to try to give you a sense of scale, that's one of those drag lines that you saw earlier, that little dot. It's about 22 stories high, that giant earth-moving machine. And these operations, again, we've imported some before and after imagery so you can kind of get a sense of what they look like now and what they used to look like. And the beautiful green mountains that, people everywhere else in the country probably take for granted will always be there for them. But we don't take that for granted in Appalachia. And then you can take these areas and turn them red. This one area you've just been flying around and exploring, you zoom out and you see how many of these mines there are. This is southern West Virginia, and we're going to fly over into eastern Kentucky. And you start to get a sense of why Vanity Fair and the article that they published that accompanied the photos we saw earlier today called mountaintop removal one of the greatest acts of physical destruction that this country has ever wreaked upon itself. And then we can zoom back out and we can see all the coal-fired power plants across the country that are connected either directly or indirectly to mountaintop removal in Appalachia. So when we released this tool, it had a big impact not only on all the people who have seen it, but it also got the attention of the Wall Street Journal because they realized that it marked a new era in the transparency of information of what's happening in the corporate sector. And the reason that they wrote about the tool was because they were trying to make the point that business as usual was not going to be able to go on without a lot of scrutiny by regular people, even little bitty grassroots organizations in Appalachia, now that we have all this technology at our fingertips. And that has obviously had a huge, huge impact on how we've been able to connect this issue to people wherever they are and how we've been able to really put the companies that are responsible for it on notice. So finally, I just want to give you a little preview of some of the things we're doing to also envision some alternatives. This is Cayford Mountain, which is a notorious site where a lot of people have gone on the ground to see mountaintop removal. It's right next to this mountain, Coal River Mountain, which, as you see in red, has high wind potential, and in black you'll see a proposed mountaintop removal mine that is planned that would destroy this mountain and would destroy the potential to have a commercial wind farm on the mountain. And so we have been traveling around the community door to door with our allies there, promoting the idea of putting a wind farm on this mountain instead of blowing it up and flattening it and putting in a 6,000 acre mountaintop removal mine. And the odds are steep because this mountain is owned by a private land speculation company, as many of the mountains are in Appalachia. But this is a vision that the people in the community have embraced. And one of the things that's been most remarkable to me about this is, here's the future we see for this beautiful green mountain. Here's the future the coal company envisions for it. And the people who are in that community, every single one of them has ties to coal. Every single one of them has a member of their family working in the coal industry. And everybody we talk to would rather have a wind farm than to have that mountain blown up. And so if I can leave you with anything, I would like to leave you with this quote from Al Gore. He spoke about mountaintop removal at the Netroots Nation conference a couple days ago and said this. He said, "Mountaintop removal is part and parcel of the same dysfunctional energy system that is causing global warming. It is also facilitated by the same moral blindness to the consequences of what we're doing. And it's all done in an automated way. That's why the coal miners lost all their jobs. And when we make this transition to renewable fuels, we have to keep them in mind. We ought to guarantee a good job in the fresh air and sunshine for every single coal miner who has been affected by the transition over to renewable fuels." These mountains that you're going to see here are all mountains that have been blown up by mountaintop removal. And when I was born, all these mountains were still standing. These are real places. These are mountains that meant something to people. These are places where people hunted and they hiked and they fished and they introduced their natural world to their children. These are the mountains where Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett roamed. These are the wilderness where we forged our democracy, and they have all been lost. And they'll never come back. Mountains don't grow back. And this is the face of our current energy policy in this country. It's also a very visceral and a very real reason to choose a different path. And this is why we need change. And I would offer that if the people of Appalachia, if the people in parts of this country that have paid such a high price for our energy use in this country can be part of that transition, can be leading the way in that transition, that we will not only solve our energy crisis, but we can once again inspire the world.